Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, whenever you are. Welcome back to another live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, and I'm coming to you live from Glasgow, Scotland, right here on the number one network, TFRlive.com. That's right, Truth Frequency Radio, where silence is consent. And don't forget to check out the official sponsors of the Kev Baker Show over at getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Me personally, I'm on their Formula 13, their peppermint tea, and so far, so good. They say it's the tea that makes you go, and it certainly is. And I urge all of you to please check out getthetea.com and remember to let them know that you heard it here on the Kev Baker Show. So then, let's get on to tonight's fun games and the show that I can safely say is my easiest every month. And I feel quite guilty saying that, but I say it's my easiest show for a number of reasons. That's because it's all the kind of topics that I absolutely love. And the special guest that we've got lined up, he just never fails to deliver. But before we bring him on, I am joined in our number one here tonight with Jimmy Jeans. How you doing, man? And Jimmy, tonight, this is the kind of topics that I just love to get into, dude. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, as usual. I mean, Cal, my dog is doing fantastic, too. He's snoring here. It sounds like the devil, but it's not. It's just my dog.
I love this when we get the dog snoring sound effect. But Jimmy is over in the chat room at tfrlive.com/chat. And he will be able to take any of your questions, any of your comments, and we'll be putting them to tonight's special guest. So who is it, I hear you say? Well, we are rejoined by my good friend, special guest, public speaker, researcher, author, Ben Emlyn-Jones. And Ben is the man behind a website called Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, or as it's more snappily referred to, Japanwo. Now, that's a website dedicated to the latest news, views, and reviews from the world of government cover-ups, ghosts, UFOs, hospital porters, paranormal investigation, cryptozoology, hidden knowledge, forbidden history, archaeology, chemtrails, and there's so much more. I'd be here for the full 2 hours. You can check out his work at a number of websites, the main one of which, where you can keep up to date with his daily blogs and stuff like that, is hpanwo-voice.blogspot.com. That's hpanwo-voice.blogspot.com. Ben, welcome back to the madness that only happens here on the Kev Baker Show.
Hey, Kev, it's good to be back, mate. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into some of it. I do always look forward to these little talks of ours every month.
It's fantastic because it's almost like the universe, you know. Just before you come on every month, it kind of throws some manna from heaven our way. There's always some kind of big story that relates to the kind of stuff that we often talk about together. And tonight is going to be no different. But before we get there, me and you know, we're quite, I suppose you would say, prominent figures within the conspirasphere, the alternative media, the public kind of conference world in the UK. And that is a double-edged sword because it brings with it the ability to meet lots of nice people, speak to lots of interesting guests, some really good stuff. But then there's the flip side of that. And it also attracts some of the dregs of digital society. And the dregs of digital society are the trolls. Now, me and you have both had our fair share of trolling, and I know. And I hate to see it and I hate to hear about it. But, Ben, they're back after you, right?
Yes, unfortunately, in the last 2 weeks, I've had the worst example so far, actually, of troll attacks. And it's really sad when this sort of thing happens. And as you said, there were some really, truly despicable people out there in the world of the internet, and that's about all they can do. They can't do anything else. And they have been saying the most awful things about me. I won't repeat what they said, but they've accused me of something really horrific, and I've had to respond as best I can. And it's sad, but unfortunately, there's a lot of weakness and indifference among the community as well. And I have had a lot of support from some people, and people have been really, really good, and they've closed ranks to protect me and to back me up. But others have simply want nothing more to do with me. It's as if what I've been accused of is almost like catching the plague, and they just want to run from me as quickly as they can. I've had people blocking me, unfriending me, just not refusing to speak to me. It's been a painful experience, Kev. I must say, it's been painful. It's been disappointing, and I'm hoping to pull my way out of that now. I think I've done all the responses I need to respond to anyone who's willing to listen, and they realise that the accusations that have been made against me are completely false, and so anyone who's willing to listen, I'm confident will understand that. And those are the people I think I'm going to just need to surround myself with and trust and hang out with. And anyone else, I'm going to have to get used to the fact that these people are not worthy, and I need to be able to keep away from them and take it in my stride when they judge and condemn me without a second thought, because that's something I've found difficult to deal with. But I'm sort of learning to get over it more quickly. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I've had to develop a very thick skin very, very quickly. I look at somebody like Emlyn-Jones, and I honestly wonder how that man can sleep at night, because the level of trolling I take doesn't even register on the Richter scale compared to what Alex takes, but it really, really does affect me. I can be quite sensitive to it, but now I found a way of dealing with it, Ben. You just absolutely do a 180, you turn your back on it, and you ignore it. I don't mind constructive criticism. In fact, I welcome that. However, when it's just nasty name-calling and baseless accusations, to acknowledge it is to almost give them credit for it. And you just don't want to go feeding the trolls, Jimbo, do you?
Nah, well, I mean, a lot of these trolls aren't even real people. They're just set up to antagonize you and stop you from doing whatever you're doing. But I think, we have reached a point here in 2018 where all you have to do at this point is make an accusation and have a bunch of lemmings jump on the bandwagon and click a bunch of dislikings of your material, call you a racist or whatever else. And you're in the dustbin, and you have no recourse to go back against these false accusations that people make on you on the internet and cause all these problems. So yeah, I mean, Emlyn-Jones gets trolled, but conversely, there's a lot of things he says that he deserves to get trolled on. And here's the thing: I don't like trolls necessarily, but I do agree with their ability to say what they got to say. They just don't need to come over and say it at a place where they're not welcome. In other words, there's no reason for a racist to come over someplace over on a black chat and start making racist comments. That's not a good thing. But at the same time, we still got to allow people to say what they have to say. So there's a weird there's a weird dichotomy there, I think.
There's one thing allowing people to say what they've got to say, and then there's just personal trolling, which is it's just no need for it. There's no place for it.
Yeah.
Everyone's entitled to free speech, but in the end of the day, myself and Ben, we post stuff out there, and we're looking and putting stuff out there for an audience that don't have to agree with us, but at least they appreciate the time and everything else we put in. And for these people to come along, and it just sullies everything. It goes into the comment section, and before you know it, nobody's talking about the content anymore. And whether they're paid for or whether they're just venomous little idiots, job done, because they just distract.
Yeah, and they derail the conversation, and that's pretty much what most of it's set up for. Like I was saying, though, it's these agitators and these people that come in an area where there's like-minded people having conversations, trying to break up the conversations, is not welcome at all. And it's honestly, it's unacceptable. But if anything happens on any of my sites, anybody wants to troll me, they're welcome to come on and troll it. And because I take care of trolls right on the spot. And it doesn't matter to me. I'm not worried about whether or not I'm going to feed the trolls or not, because most of the time these trolls making these remarks, they last about 2 seconds under intense sarcastic scrutiny.
You see, that's 2 seconds of your life you're never getting back, Jimbo. That's a lost 2 seconds dealing with them. But before they distract us from all the good stuff we're going to get in tonight, Ben, always remember, don't let that minority fringe kind of take your mind off the fact that you have got so many more supporters and so many people who are behind you. It's almost tenfold, 20-fold, infinity-fold, brother, because I see the numbers for the shows that we do on here, and it's always top numbers. People love to hear what you've got to say because, in my opinion, and many others over here in Britain, you're probably one of the most prolific and, well, in my mind, long-term researchers into UFOs, paranormal, and all the stuff that goes on over here in the UK. So don't let that minority fringe distract you, big man. And if you're needing any cuddles and love, you can always come to Team KBS.
That's right. I love Ben too, and if I would have known anybody who's over there trolling you, Ben, I would have come over there myself personally and took care of them. I'd take them out. Chop them off the knees.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jimmy.
I reported one of them to Facebook, but you know what Facebook are like. They don't sort things like that out. But if you put something with a nasty word in it, then you'll be jailed for a week. But let's get into the good stuff, Ben. And a number of times now, we have spoken about a very mysterious space object. And myself and Ben would love to get into the space stuff. But never in my memory of space stories can I remember anything as mysterious, as enigmatic, and as just perplexing to the scientific world as something called Oumuamua. Now, this is, of course, the asteroid, no it's not, comet, no it's not, who knows what it is, that came flying through our solar system last year. And it's the story that just keeps on giving. And myself and Whistles just briefly touched on this last night. He'll be along in hour number 2. But Ben, I sent this to you yesterday. And now we're looking at Harvard coming out with a paper and basically not doing anything to dispel the speculation that this might be some kind of alien craft.
Yeah. This is the best thing since Tabby Star. It may even be more important than that. It's really an incredible thing. And we talked about it on the show before. The strange object that was only detected, unfortunately, when it was already heading away from the Earth. But we don't know much about it except that it's long and thin in its shape. It's not sort of potato-shaped or spherical like most asteroids are. We know it's not in orbit around the sun either. It's because we know from its speed and its trajectory that it's actually an interstellar object that's just happens to have wandered into the solar system, or maybe didn't wander. Maybe it came here deliberately. But it's now heading out into space. It's heading out very, very fast indeed. It's in fact in January it's going to pass the orbit of Saturn. So it's done everything within 2 years. Within 2 years of it being detected, it's already now almost out of the solar system. But it's really what's very strange about it is ever since it was found, people were wondering, well, could this be something artificial based on its shape? Based on the fact that it was not in orbit, and also it doesn't appear to be any kind of comet, because one of the first theories was that this is a rogue comet, and in fact that theory has been resurrected because it's actually changing course and speed at the moment. And now comets do that. You see, comets, unlike asteroids and other completely solid objects, comets are partly made of ice. So the ice evaporates, and it melts and evaporates when the comet gets very hot. And when it gets close to the sun, and the outgassing, these streams, which we call the coma, which is the famous tail of the comet, is actually acts as an impromptu propulsion system. So the comets actually do change course and speed quite a bit. They wobble as they travel through the inner solar system. The thing about it is Oumuamua didn't do that when it was in the inner solar system at all, even when it was in the hot area near the sun. So it's not behaving like a comet then. And the question, if it is outgassing, why is it outgassing now when it's near the orbit of Saturn? When you get that far away from the sun, it's freezing cold. And a comet would normally be inert by the time it's that far from the sun. Any remaining water or water vapor inside it would have frozen again to remain frozen until it comes back to the sun. So the fact that it's changing course and speed now is really, really weird. And also, this new paper that's come out, this new paper by Harvard, they've admitted that it could actually be responding to the unfurling of a solar sail. Now, a solar sail is actually something that we on Earth are building, and they tested one in orbit a little while ago. It's a form of propulsion, which is literally like it sounds like. It's like a sail for a sailing ship in space, but it uses solar wind to propel it, because there's no real wind. And solar wind are charged particles that come from the sun, and they actually do exert pressure. Only a small amount. The solar sail has to be actually huge, several miles across, even for a small spacecraft. But it contains no fuel. Well, a spacecraft with a solar sail wouldn't need to carry any fuel because it would be operating on the solar wind. So it could keep accelerating and accelerating on the solar wind and reach very, very high speeds and wouldn't have to carry any fuel to slow it down. Now, if this is what's happened, this is one explanation of maybe what Oumuamua is doing, and even like very mainstream scientists are taking it seriously. I'm really excited by this, Kev. I mean, I really am. It makes you wonder, what's it going to do next? What if it turns around and starts coming back?
Same here. I mean, even from the initial stories about this, I believe it was October last year, right off the bat, you've got it spotted by an array over in Hawaii. So that's the explanation for the Hawaiian name that it's got. But even the name, Messenger, there's one kind of real kind of red flag, something suspicious right off the bat. Why call it a messenger? And then it was the actual, real scientific institutes. They were the ones that first came out and started speaking about this as a, quote, alien probe. Now, usually in my experience, that comes from people like me, people like Ben, people in the conspirasphere. But here was, recognized astrophysicists coming out and saying, you know what, God damn it, this could well be an alien probe. And now here we are a year later, and we're still talking about this. And something that you mentioned to me, and I hadn't even thought of this, Ben. It's a brilliant observation by yourself or whoever you heard it from. But we've all got this image of this kind of rocky cigar-shaped object that's kind of twirling through space. It's kind of making its motion. It's flying about. Yet in reality, we've never seen it.
No.
And that image that we're all used to seeing, and I've put in many's a Photoshop for the shows that we've done covering this, all of it coming from the imagination of not just any scientist, any artist, but a NASA artist, no less. So we don't even know what this looks like. It could literally be like cylindrical, as we're told, but shiny metal. It could literally look like an alien probe.
Well, you see, this is the thing. The NASA artist is actually misleading us because, as you said, it's an artist impression. It's basically a work of imagination. They've got a long, thin object, but they deliberately made it look like something natural, a lump of rock with lots of little, like, normal, natural crooks and crannies in it, nooks and crannies. To me, it looks like, I don't know what the polite word is I can use on the radio, but a piece of excrement, shall we say. It looks like that, quite frankly. It's long, thin.
Flying jobby. Just say it looks like a flying jobby.
A flying jobby, mate. Okay, a flying
jobby. Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh's brother. That's what it looks like.
That's exactly what it looks like. But we don't know it looks like that. No one's ever seen it close enough. We know that it's red in color. It's red. We know that it has a lot of iron in it, which would be interesting because if it's metallic, it could be artificial construction like our own on Earth. A lot of our own transports are made from iron-based metals and things like that.
Get this as well, Ben, right? Because I was thinking about this today when we were, obviously, it was in my mind for tonight's show. But if I'm somebody that's looking, even on this planet, to really come up with a very viable method, means of traveling in space, some kind of space vehicle. Now, we know down here, scientists and inventors, they always look to the natural version, right? And try and get things as close to something that does the job naturally in nature. And what we see in space is there anything that naturally does travel interstellar, that whips around planets and goes on massive long journeys, just the way we want a space vehicle to do? And there is. And you've got comets and you've got asteroids. Now, these are things that naturally are able to travel distances in space. So if you've got a civilization who've kind of caught on to that and they think, well, if that's the best kind of structure that nature has come up with for flying around in space and it seems durable, why don't we try to mimic that? So I'm very open to the fact that you might have a civilization out there, because I've seen people saying, well, why would you build a probe that looks like an asteroid, Kev? That's just ridiculous. Not really ridiculous when you think about how an asteroid is so good at traveling in space.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people on Earth have suggested turning asteroids into spacecraft by putting things inside them like an engine and quarters for the peak crew and things like that, because they provide good protection from radiation, and you have like essentially a solid hull, which you don't have to manufacture, and it makes perfect sense. And our own machines, our own flying machines, machines of all kinds often do resemble natural objects. Our aircraft look very much like birds. Airplanes look rather like birds. Helicopters look.
What did we do to try and get something that flies in the sky? Well, what do we have that flies in the sky? Oh, look, there's a bird. And how did our planes turn out? Pretty much based on what we've seen with the birds, right?
Exactly. They have a body. They have long wings, which are aerofoils. And, of course, our helicopters look very much like dragonflies because they hover. If you look at a dragonfly, it has this body. It has a long tail, and it uses the tail to stabilize itself like a helicopter does. And so submarines look, they're the same shape as fish. We go on and on and on like that. So why wouldn't that carry on? And also, it doesn't. The thing about it is, it doesn't look like many other asteroids because it's long. It's at least 10 times as long as it is wide. It's over 1,000 feet long. It's about 100 feet wide.
Can we throw it out there that it could possibly be the monolith?
You see, what if it is? Because Arthur C. Clarke has written several books that have come true, because he wrote several books in which people communicate by satellites in the future. Of course, we do communicate by satellites now, things like that. So what if this is the monolith, or Rama, this cylindrical shaped spacecraft from another of his books, Rendezvous with Rama, or the monolith from the Space Odyssey series, which again this thing could be square, it could be a rectangular, like the monolith. We haven't seen it close by. What you see from NASA, the big jobby, is an artist's impression. It's a long, thin thing. But what if it's a long, thin, cylindrical, shiny thing? It's made mostly of metal. And if only we'd known it was coming, we could have put a craft up there to intercept it and get a good close look.
I love this story. I absolutely love this story. And, even if it turns out to be just some kind of space kind of rock object that we've never documented before, and there's a very kind of logical, cosmic explanation to it, fair dues. But I don't know, there's just something about this. And again, at the same time, I have to keep my mind open to the fact that we could be getting sold a bill of goods here. We should always wonder when the world of mainstream science starts sounding like us guys, Ben, maybe there's an agenda afoot.
Well, but I do wonder this, Kev, because, of course, there's much more, of course, when you come into the area of UFOs and things like that. And of course, we know from our own research that there are aliens and they're already here on Earth. So we don't know if there's a connection between the UFOs and this particular object, this particular UFO, because it is an unidentified flying object. I mean, if it keeps changing course and speed enough, sooner or later it may do something that leaves it in no doubt. For example, supposing it turns around and comes back. Now that would be impossible for any craft. I mean, or this could be, for example, just one of a fleet of craft. So we may see other Oumuamua type objects coming through the solar system at some point, because maybe this is just maybe it literally is a scout or messenger, as its name translates from the Hawaiian. Maybe the people who gave it that name had some kind of insight, subconscious insight. This could be like the advanced messenger scout or explorer before more turn up later. I mean, this is what happened in Rendezvous with Rama, because the first spacecraft that came through the solar system, and in Rendezvous with Rama, the spacecraft comes through the solar system, and it's a long, thin, cylindrical spacecraft, and it's an alien spacecraft, and it's followed by others. The first one comes through, but then there's more, and there's a part 2 and a part 3 to the story. So are we going to see that? I don't know. I mean, this is really interesting from SETI and things like that. They're going to be interested in this, aren't they?
It really puts another light altogether on the race to create the Space Force. Sixth branch of the U.S. military. What do they know? What was the message that Oumuamua brought with it? What was it that the breakthrough project, Yuri Milner and the late Stephen Hawkins, what signal did they pick up of Oumuamua?
Oh, yeah.
We'll come back for the break. More of this with Ben Emlyn-Jones.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kev Baker, and this is the Kev Baker Show, right here on the home of KBS, Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. If you want to head on over to the chat room, it is getting a bit rowdy in there tonight. Everyone having a good laugh, staying on topic and having comedy with it, no less, which is always a good sign. Yes, you can head on over there at TFRlive.com/chat. Now, before we get back into it, myself, and thanks to Ben, I've formed a really good working relationship with the team over at UFO Truth Magazine. You can find that ufotruthmagazine.co.uk. And Tino, he was telling me that there is a new trailer on the way for a movie that Gary Heseltine has been on to talk about here. And it's called Capel Green. And this is the definitive documentary, Hollywood style. And I say that, confidently, of everything that went down in 1980 at Rendlesham Forest. Now, please, you can check all of this out over at Capel Green on Facebook. I'll certainly be sharing the link as the trailer becomes available. But, Ben, you're definitely in just as much anticipation as I am for Capel Green coming out.
Very much so. In fact, this ties in with what we talked about when we first started the show about the troll attacks against me, because there's a direct connection between Capel Green and the people who are being so unpleasant to me, because it's basically a part of the same story. It's all to do with Larry Warren and his testimony and the history of the Rendlesham Forest incident and the publicising of this unique and incredibly remarkable UFO event. This is going to be a completely groundbreaking documentary, because people say, "Oh, Rendlesham Forest's been done to death. It's just we've been there, done that, and there's nothing more to talk about, really." No, this is going to present completely new evidence. There's some new documents. I've seen these documents, and I believe they're authentic. These are going to be presented in the film. There's also new interviews with Larry Warren, who is the original whistleblower, despite these vociferous claims to the contrary. And indeed, he's had a...
Unlike Roswell, where most of the eyewitnesses now, unfortunately, have probably left us, it doesn't surprise me that Rendlesham in some ways continues to give, because there's obviously going to be people that were privy to what went on that night in 1980, Ben. And some, unlike those who have come forward so far, some will have been quite happy to remain in the shadows. But over time, we see how people's attitudes change. The closer or the older they get, mortality kind of takes over, and they think, I need to get this off my chest. So, I think we'll still have more information to come on Rendlesham Forest. And for me, Rendlesham should be, it really should be up there with Roswell.
Absolutely.
For a number of reasons. And you can just say because it's the UK's Roswell or whatever. But that story, there's so many different aspects to it. So many different and like you say, that the whole controversy around it. For me, when you're analysing these events, you tend to find the most controversy around the ones that have real substance to them.
I think so.
They want to distract, they want to cause division, because when they're doing that, then people are distracted from what they're there for in the first place. To look at Rendlesham Forest.
Well, that's one of the side effects of the troll crisis, is that, in a sense, proper research into this particular phenomenon really had ground to a halt before Capel Green began production. The whole issue, the difference between Roswell and Rendlesham Forest is very, very interesting indeed. Roswell was a crash retrieval, I believe, of an extraterrestrial craft, but this, as you said, there was a long gap between the actual event happening and research beginning. And really, you can time the beginning of the Roswell project to 1978, very precisely, to when Stanton Friedman met Jesse Marcel Jr. So that's 31 years. But in terms of the Rendlesham Forest, the the penny started to drop and the cards fell to the table very, very quickly. In fact, it was by 1983 that the first news story came out. So it's barely 2 years after the actual event happened. There was the famous headline in the News of the World: UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. And it's got a lot to do with the fact that there were some excellent investigators. There was Jenny Randalls, Dot Street, Brenda Butler, Georgina Bruni, and these very dedicated investigators got together quite early, because I know that Brenda lives in the local area. They had a lot of friends who were among the American airmen. They managed to get a lot of information, and that's when they got in touch with this guy Art Wallace, who actually was Larry Warren. I don't blame him for using a different name, and the story came out. Now, if that hadn't happened, we may still not know about Rendlesham today, or it might simply be a rumor, like so many other UFO stories, or something that might have happened in Suffolk back then. We don't know, but there's a couple of people whispering about it in pubs, but that's all we know, unfortunately. But no, thanks to the dedicated effort of Larry Warren and these investigators, the word got out very quickly, and the cover-up essentially failed. And what's been happening since then is really a damage limitation exercise. There's been a lot of disinformation, and there's been a lot of division sown among the witnesses, and it's never been as bad as it is today. And we have some quite famous individuals within the UFO community who I consider less than trustworthy, who are now jumping on the bandwagon of the trolls. And I think that's it. I look at the one particular person, and I think I thought this would be a bit beneath him. He's not normally doesn't normally descend into these personal bickering fests, but he has. And I do have to ask, why is that? Maybe the trolls, I mean, they're inadvertently serving a purpose. They've hit the note accidentally that the government want to amplify. And of course, as you just been saying, this is everything else. This affects the proper research. The proper research that should be going on is being hampered and even stopped altogether by nastiness and bitterness and cruelty and attacks online. So, the Cable Green, in a sense, is a way of breaking through that. And I think this is going to be a really, really great vindication, because when the film is released, it's going to be unmistakable that what Larry Warren has said is true. And the evidence is all going to be there. And obviously, there are some individuals who will never shut up about it. But
I cannot wait, because, I mean, speaking to Gary, there's obviously some stuff we're privy to we can't share. But, even looking at the trailer, you can tell that this looks very, very slick indeed. This looks like a very high-quality production. And I'm glad that people are going to get to see this. And hopefully it'll put Rendlesham Forest where it deserves to be on the map. And it will encourage more people to come forward to speak their truth. And we have to keep our minds open, Ben, to whatever new truth comes our way. And that's what we have to do as researchers. I'm very much, Team Larry. I have been quite vocal and quite public about my support for him. But I think there might even be more to this story. Not to take away from what people like Larry have added to it, but I think there might be more, because there's so many different aspects to it. Like I say, we'll watch this space. I think it's going to continue to give, much like Oumuamua.
Yeah, I think
great. On you go.
I was going to say, I think that there could be, we hit a critical mass with Cable Green, because we're already getting other witnesses coming forward. It started with a guy called Steve Longero, who I'm very, very grateful to. He spoke at the UFO Truth magazine conference. He's a man who actually was a witness to the event. He didn't actually see the craft, but he was there in the forest at the time. He was a member of the 81st Security Police Squadron with Larry Warren, and he has actually gone public now, and hopefully more will come forward. And like I say, I share your sentiments that when enough people do that, hopefully we'll hit some sort of point where the trickle will turn into an avalanche.
Absolutely. And even the trolling, one aspect of that, it could be out there to put people off coming forward. Why would somebody want to enter this arena when they can see all of the debacle that unfolds in the digital battle space called social media hour by hour? So, it's Rendlesham Forest. I mean, myself, you, and Johnny Whistles will be coming up in hour number 2. Certainly one of our favourite stories. But, disclosure in general, we were talking about Oumuamua. We're going to get back to that. Here we are talking about possible, communications with an alien probe. And I say communications because we had Yuri Milner, the late Stephen Hawkins. I think it's the Breakthrough Project. I think that's the name of it. And they were basically saying that they were going to try and pick up the radio signals, if there was any, coming from Oumuamua. And, we're talking about so many encouraging things within ufology, within the disclosure topic, if we can call it that. I don't even like calling it that anymore. Yet at the same time, a community that's after truth about something so specific, never has it been so divided. And that's really, really confusing.
It's sad, yeah, and I mean it's what's sad about it is we're kind of entering one of the most exciting periods of this entire subject, and the Oumuamua situation, I think, is going to have a knock-on effect on ufology, regardless what happens. But the actual Breakthrough Listen project actually did actually scan Oumuamua with a radio telescope, and this was in the early days when it first came past the Earth. Now. They didn't actually find anything. It was basically inert. It wasn't transmitting anything.
That's what told us, Ben.
Of course, well, yeah. But the thing about it is, what else I've got to ask is this was before the thing went live. When I say when it went live, when it started altering course and speed, when that happened. That I think I said at the time, because I did a live stream on my YouTube channel. And I said that they should repeat that experiment. They should repeat the study they originally did and point the telescope at it again to see if it's transmitting now. That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to see if they would do that, but they haven't done it. It should be scanned again. Someone else, if the Breakthrough Listen people won't do it, then someone else needs to do it.
Absolutely. Now, somebody in the chat room, just backtracking a little, they were talking about Rendlesham being Britain's secret nuclear site. It was the Americans that had the nukes there, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was. These were RAF facilities, but the U.S. Air Force were using them. And what's more, they had a vast nuclear arsenal there, the biggest in the country in terms of tactical weapons, not including the Trident and things like that, or Polaris as it was in those days. But these were not licensed, and so one of the upshots of the Rendlesham Forest incident is there was a bit of a political scandal over the matter, because there was some people were asking questions in Parliament about how they had these warheads at Woodbridge Bentwaters, and at the moment the irony was that all the publicity, and maybe deliberately, was focused on another airbase in Berkshire called Greenham Common, and there was a massive amount of protesting there. There was a huge, I think they formed a human chain around the entire base at one point, and there's only like about a couple of dozen warheads there. I think they are hundreds at Woodbridge Bentwaters, and so. In a sense, those protesters were deliberately, I think, probably deliberately misdirected. There was a feint. They were deliberately misdirected to the wrong location. But this wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for that UFO incident. I think that puts the kibosh on the whole idea this is some kind of hoax, because it can't have been a hoax. Because who's going to carry out a hoax like that, and why? There's no motive for it.
Plus, it fits in, when you put it into the context of all the other incidents that's occurred at other nuclear facilities. I mean, this isn't a one-off, Ben, is it? It's almost as if they're attracted to these places. It's something we've said before, but, it's certainly the frequency at which you get UFOs around nuclear sites. Statistically, it's an anomaly because it's far too frequent.
I mean, I mentioned this on a previous show, but I actually posted I think I posted the image in the chat box in the chat, but I actually took a photograph myself when I was hiking in Scotland. I was walking around the Firth of the Clyde, and I captured a disc-shaped object on the photograph. I didn't notice anything at the time. It was only when I looked at the photograph afterwards that I actually saw that there was this object on there. And the object happened to be a photograph of the largest nuclear facilities, the only nuclear facility now in the country, I believe, unless they've got some we don't know about, and that is Faslane, which is the Trident base. These are strategic ballistic missiles launched from submarines, and there's a huge facility in Scotland in the Firth of Clyde, just outside Glasgow, and there was an object there. There was a disc-shaped object, and there's many other reports of things like that. As you said, Kev, whatever the UFO's motives are, whatever they're just going through their little heads, we don't know, but they do seem to have an interest in our nuclear weapons capability. I'm sure you're familiar with Captain Robert Salas, who was a missile combat launch crew member, who actually was in his bunker, like the launch control facility for some weapons, and the missile shut down because of the presence of a UFO, and he's spoken publicly about this. There's been several other incidents like that. So they are watching us, and they're watching what we're doing with our weapons. And you know, there's Dr. Robert Jacobs as well, who was actually witnessed the launch of a missile, and the missile was shot down. There was a beams of light coming from this disc-shaped object, which caused the rocket to crash. Now, what's interesting about the project he was involved in is the ultimate objective of this particular project was launch a rocket to the moon and detonate a nuclear warhead on the moon. Now, that because of the attack by the UFO, that project was cancelled. It's almost as if the UFOs knew what we were doing. The aliens knew what we were up to, and they wanted to stop us. They were saying, like, if you're going to use these weapons, keep them on your own planet. I think they were saying something like that.
Absolutely. And, you know, I have to think about it. You know, if there are civilizations that have got technology that can get them here and back home, then they're obviously far superior in terms of technology. And I would imagine, you know, us humans, we think we know it all. And don't get me wrong, we certainly do have a really, you know, brilliant kind of handle on science, but we don't have the full picture. And it's much like the spectrum of light. We think this is glorious, everything that we see here. Then we learn that we can only see this very small slither within the spectrum of light. So I think our science, when you put it up against all the other truths and all the other technologies that are still waiting for us to discover and tap into, again, it's just a really small slither. So these aliens, these other entities, Ben, I imagine, you know, they know all about nukes, but they also know about how to manipulate time and space. They know about dimensions, all these other things as well. And obviously, you know, at some point in their journey to where they've got to today, they maybe learnt the hard way about nukes. Because I think out of all the sciences out there, it's got to be one of the most lunatic forms of, you know, harnessing energy, of putting into bombs. It's just craziness, man.
Well, if you take a step back and look at our world as an extraterrestrial species might do, and Carl Sagan actually made this point in his Cosmos TV series, that because he actually does explore through science fiction certain elements such as civilizations that destroy themselves through warfare, who develop doomsday weapons like the nuclear bomb, and destroy themselves that way. And in a sense, it's the ultimate in insanity. It's anti-evolutionary, and they're probably thinking maybe they themselves came close to destroying themselves at one point on their planet or their dimension or wherever they come from, and now they're keeping an eye on us to see if we're going to do the same. And maybe they might step in and help if we got too close to that point. I hope they would. I'll be happy to accept any help they can give. But it's an insane thing to do, to develop a weapons system that is so terrible that it could actually destroy the world. It's just it's too risky. Even people say, well, it's necessary to have a deterrent, but the thing about it is, even if something went wrong, even if there's some kind of mistake, which has actually happened a couple of times, and missiles start getting launched, then the other side's going to launch back, and before you know it, missiles are flying everywhere. And God knows how far that will go before someone says, "Oops, sorry, we made a mistake." So the extraterrestrials, maybe they care about us. Maybe they're trying to pull us back from the brink of this craziness that we've fallen into. I hope they do.
I think there must be some kind of almost threshold, some critical mass, some point that, you know, they're watching for something. Maybe we hit some kind of scientific milestone. I think when we start going down the nukes and things, I think that kind of put us on the wrong track. I think there's another track, you know, if we start heading back into the stuff that Tesla was on about, the ether and harnessing our planet's own energies and everything it's capable of producing for us. I think maybe then we'll almost have, for lack of a better kind of way of looking at it, you know, passed a test. It's time for us to graduate. And maybe then we'll be given almost, we'll be allowed out of the sand pit into the bigger garden.
That's a good way of putting it, Kevin. I think that's true, and I hope it's true. But one thing I know is that we did hit a threshold where the UFO phenomenon took off enormously, and I think we can pinpoint it very precisely to of July of 1945, because that was when the Trinity explosion happened. That is the first ever test of a nuclear bomb, and of course that led a couple of months later to the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the World War II, and as Jim Mars put it, the late great Jim Mars said, "Oh my God, the kids have found the matches," and that it was only after that, you see, that the UFO presence exploded. It didn't begin then, as some people try to pretend, but it exploded. In a sense, we've been involved in a global flap of UFOs since that date. And it's possible that we may hit another threshold where the attitudes of the aliens towards us will change again. And it could be, as you said, the disclosure of free energy, or even the disclosure of the presence of the UFOs. And something like a Muamua or Tabby Star or something like that could be the actual that could be the catalyst. That could be the key to the door, I hope, if that's the case.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up. That was myself and Whistles referenced that along with a Mua last night as the most interesting couple of space stories ever. But Epic in the chat room, you know, he's giving a big shout out to the late Jim Mars, and definitely everyone here on the show, I think, would echo that. You know, Jim brought so much information to the table and so many topics, and that's how myself and Jimmy and Ben here are able to follow in that giant's footsteps and hopefully continue to lead people to think about things in a different way. And we're talking about ufology here in this segment, Ben, and, you know, a lot of controversy with the kind of secret space program angle of things going on right now. And you, like me, you like to interview people. Now, how do you set about, or what kind of litmus test do you have for whistleblowers when they're coming, you know, maybe from the world of secret space programs, stuff like that? Because I get that it's not always going to be possible that these people have black and white kind of documents or the photos to prove any of the stuff that they're saying. However, how do you kind of set about, what's your BS meter, basically?
Well, to be honest, Kev, it's very much intuitive. I almost almost have a kind of sixth sense. I can't always necessarily describe when I think someone is pulling a fast one on me, but I always can sense it. I always know it, and I tend to go along with that. And I give people a chance, even if I do get that impression from them. I do give them a chance to talk to me, and I'm happy to talk to them. Obviously, I'm not going to do anything serious as regards their case unless I have good reason to think that their case is valid. But when I do get that impression, I'll investigate further. And of course, this testimony varies a lot. There are fantasists, there are people who make up stories and things like that, and there are people who try to pull a fast one, like you said.
And because we believe these programs, or at least, sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ben, but I mean, I do believe that there are secret space projects. I do believe there'll be, you know, either pilots or soldiers that are in units that we'll have never heard of. And in fact, they're probably not working on this world. However, you know, that just because we believe in that, you know, it's hard for people to produce evidence they were part of it. Yet at the same time, these people must be out there. So it's hard to really kind of figure out at times who's real, who's not, and who's just out there to muddy the waters. It's perilous, man.
Yeah, again, I do think instinct is a good guide. And I know that's not very scientific, but I found it quite accurate. And it doesn't mean if you're getting bad vibes off someone, you just ignore them or call them names or denounce them publicly. But you can just use it as a method of working your way through the obstacles to the good stuff. And of course, there are people out there on the internet who do tell very tall stories. I mean, in the break, we were discussing the two gentlemen who were talking about the blue avians, and they've been all over the internet going on and on about these blue avians, which interestingly is a reference, I think, possibly to Arthur C. Clarke's book Rendezvous with Rama, or one of the sequels to that, where there were these avian creatures in it. I remember. Again, these particular gentlemen I don't find very convincing at all. I mean, I've been watching them for a number of years. They come out with all kinds of tall stories. And sometimes, even by my standards, I think they're a bit too far out. And I do like the woo, don't get me wrong. But I do have my limits, Kev, I do. But on the other hand, if someone comes forward and they provide a very, very interesting story, and it's backed up by several other, such as there's several other cases, there's several other witnesses, there might be some documents and things like that, or a lack of documents where documents should be, then I take a very great interest. There's a particular case in South Wales that I'm looking at the moment, so we'll see how that pans out. I'll certainly give you a report on the next show on that.
Absolutely, and we're going to be getting to a very famous case from Wales after the break, because we don't tap into Ben's Welsh roots often enough here on the show. But, Alistair, my intrepid researcher, as I call him, he brings some brilliant links to the table. All the kind of good stuff you would love to write articles about as well, Ben. Good woo. But he's sitting there, he's kind of sent me a message on Facebook saying the copyright trial awaits because we dared to say the secret space program and blue avians. Oh, what a strange world and other worlds that we live in. But no, I'm certainly going to be bringing on the dark journalist. I'm going to try and get another couple of people onto the show to speak about this as well, because you see, these people, there must be real, genuine people from in those programs out there. If these programs and projects do exist, and think of Gary McKinnon and what he brought to the table all those years ago, basically, in my mind, proving these programs do exist, then there has to be the odd whistleblower comes forward. Now, I worry in case maybe sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater when topics like blue avians and things come along, because what if there is truth in amongst all of that? And what if there's truth in amongst somebody else that comes along and we just throw out as well? So much to think about, so much woo to get into with Ben Emlyn-Jones right here on KBS Live. You can check out my website at kevbakershow.com. You can check out Ben Emlyn-Jones over on Facebook.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Hour number 2 right here for all of you on the Kev Baker Show on TFRlive.com. And don't forget to check out the official sponsors of KBS. Yes, we have an official sponsor now over at getthetea.com. I got the tea, so it's time for you to get the tea as well. Getthetea.com. We've got Ben Emlyn-Jones on tonight. We've got Jimmy Jeans. He's hanging out in the chat room. And now we have all the way from the Kingdom of Whistles. That's right, Johnny Whistles, man. How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing fine, Kev. Thanks very much. Great to be on tonight with 3 people. Kev, do you know that if you 3 were, say, like a drink, it would be a really, really good drink to have. 3 amazing guests. Big Ben, haven't spoken to him for ages. Really missed him, and it's great to be back on with him tonight. And as the usual, we've got our Jimmy as well. Fantastic.
Absolutely, Johnny. And before we get back into this with Ben, I was sending you a little teaser today. And of course, we like to talk about the Templars because of your surname, Sinclair. And that means that obviously we share a kind of passion about the curse and the mystery behind Oak Island, right? And it turns out now the new season, it's going to be starting next week. We're getting ready for all of that. And it turns out the teaser, Johnny, it says they have found treasure on Oak Island, dude. I can't wait for this to get going, man.
Oh, wow. Kev, that was, when you sent me that today, I was like, what? Really? And as you say, next week, that's not long, Kev, so it's good, because I was hoping you weren't going to say it's going to start next season or something, but that's amazing, because that show, Kev, we've kept right up to date with that, and there must be something there, Kev, as we know, and they guys know it as well. That's why they've never ever gave up this hunt for the gold or whatever is down there.
Absolutely, and we'll certainly be keeping people up to date with all of that. Now then, before the break, I didn't have time to give Ben's website a shout out, so please head on over and keep up to date with all things Ben Emlyn-Jones at hpanwo-voice.blogspot.com. And Ben, when can people listen to your radio show, sir?
Well, it goes out live every Thursday. Well, at the moment, I'm actually taking a little bit of a break for a few weeks because I have to write my new book, which is just coming out hopefully as soon as I finish reading it and revising it and getting it published.
Now, I have to tell the audience, get this for a title, folks. This is epic. Roswell Redeemed, Humanity After Disclosure. I like that, man.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've it's the third part of a trilogy. It's the original book I've written, which I talked about on the show over the years, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. And once I'd finished it, I realized, I was nearly finishing it. I thought, I'm going to have to carry this on into a sequel. So I did. Roswell Revealed, which was a world after disclosure. And when I finished that, I realized I'm going to have to make this a trilogy. And it is Roswell Redeemed, Humanity After Disclosure. But this is the last part. I'm going to end the story. And I'm nearly at the end, actually. I've not got much to write. I say another 2 weeks maybe, and I can finish it off. So that's what I'm hoping to do in the next few weeks, get that book written. And hopefully I can come on the show and talk to you about it once it's published.
Definitely. And, that's one good thing from Common Core mathematics, just thinking there. Every good trilogy of the future is going to have 4 juicy installments. That's going to be absolutely brilliant. But with that said, now then, I see in the chat room, Ken from A Land Down Under, no less. I don't know if you've heard of this actual UFO incident, Ben. I'll throw it to you anyway. Westfall UFO incident down in Australia. Westall, yes, that's the one.
Oh, yes, indeed. I think this is one of the most interesting cases that's ever come about in Australia. Happened in 1966 at a place called Clayton South in Melbourne. There's a school there called the Westall High School. And something really amazing happened. A group of disc-shaped objects, silver disc-shaped objects, appeared above the school during the middle of lessons. And the children ran out to look at them. And the discs actually landed in a nearby patch of woods called the Grange. And there's a large number of witnesses who are still alive today. They're adults now, of course, and they stick by their story. And there's a new documentary come out about this because the children saw the crafts. They saw them on the ground. These things came down, and it's similar in many ways to the incident in Zimbabwe, the aerial school incident. The kids they saw this craft. The craft then lifted up into the air. There's lots of aircraft around. There's kind of mysterious figures in suits turned up and started bullying the kids around, telling them to be quiet. I do recommend the actual documentary, whose title I can't remember, but if you look for Westall UFO, you'll find it on YouTube.
You look at Australia, Ben, and it's a very, very interesting place. And the Aboriginal people absolutely fascinates me. And I think they date back to the earliest kind of, possible time. And I wonder, when you look at some of their traditions, the dream world, stuff like that as well, I see a lot of kind of connections that you could make to what we would call UFOs today, aliens, stuff like that. Have you ever looked into the Aboriginal people?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a large tradition there of stories about extraterrestrials coming down to the Earth and strange creatures and things like that. In particular, the one genus. Now, the one genus are very interesting because they actually appear in Aboriginal art all through the ages, including ancient cave paintings from thousands of years ago. I mean, we're talking like 10, 20,000 years ago. Very, very old indeed. Long before Egypt built the pyramids. And you see creatures that, according to modern witnesses, we would say were greys. They look like the greys. They're incredible similarities to the modern depiction of the grey aliens. And these Aborigines were having encounters with these creatures in prehistoric times, which shows that the extraterrestrial interaction with humans, which I think what the Aborigines actually encountered was real, is very, very ancient. It didn't begin in 1945 with the first atomic bomb. That's just when it maybe became more common. It goes back. It seems to be a perennial experience. We humans have had links with these creatures. We have actually had interaction with these creatures throughout our history. It's possible, as we've talked about on previous shows, that it predates us even being humans.
I don't know what it is about Australia, but I feel a real kind of affinity, a real pull towards Australia. I always have, always found the people very, very pleasant, just like Scottish people, to be honest with you. So familiar, so friendly. And the country itself, so interesting. And you look at Pine Gap, and that's something that we could talk about on a show, either the woo or the kind of surveillance side of things, because Pine Gap is a US listening post, and it just happens to be built on sacred ground. This was somewhere that the Aboriginal people used to go to communicate with people from the stars. And now they're using it as a listening post. Now, I see some kind of irony, some kind of synchronicity there that I don't think is a coincidence, It's a very interesting place.
Oh, definitely. And the Pine Gap is a highly secretive location. And indeed, they have. If you try driving up there, you'll be arrested in no time towards the door, the front door. I've actually seen Pine Gap because I was on a coach trip with my brother in that area, and we saw the big dish antennas, and they've got like the radome antennas and things like that poking up into the air. And the tour guide said, people who work there, they won't talk. You ask them what they do there, and they'll say, "Oh, I just mop the floors." They won't tell you what they do. And what's strange about Pine Gap is that there was an incident which was recorded by NASA on board a space shuttle, in which a UFO type craft was actually seen, and it was moving along. As is often the case, these things are often filmed, and they're not ever published for what they are. It takes amateurs to spot them, and you see a flash of light from somewhere, and the UFO very abruptly changes direction. It changes course almost onto a reciprocal course, and it increases speed. And you see like a beam of light shoot past it. It's very, very weird. Is it STS-75 or STS-80? And you may know what I'm talking about here. But what's odd is that somebody actually went and they calculated exactly where on Earth that beam of light came from. So it looks as if almost somebody on the surface of the Earth was shooting a weapon.
Very famous one, that, yeah, very famous, yeah.
Shooting this weapon at this UFO, which only just escaped.
So you know where? From Gap.
This person calculated it came from Central Australia. That it was actually from Central Australia that this beam of light shot up towards this UFO. Now, that's exactly where Pine Gap is. And so I think it's quite likely that Pine Gap is the kind of place where a weapon like that, if it existed, would be deployed. Yeah. So, very, very interesting indeed. So, and I'd love to know what's going on in there.
And I've heard stories about Pine Gap, and Johnny, Jimmy, I'll get you guys back in here now as well. I mean, Johnny, I'll come to you first. I mean, Pine Gap, that's a place full of woo. I've heard things about jump rooms between there and secret underground bases in the US, all that kind of stuff. But the Aboriginal people, John, UFO stories, stuff like that. What's your thoughts on Australia? I think that's a place that probably you don't hear as much about, but you should on shows like this and others, right?
Well, Kev, the Aboriginal people, they are absolutely amazing. And their history, as you say, as far as UFOs and people from the stars goes, there isn't really, any other civilization on the planet just now that has got that kind of association left, because the Aborigines are the only people that is left with us. And their stories, Kev, it's passed down from generations. Do you know what I mean? And they're absolutely fantastic. They're one of the most interesting people on this planet. I can tell you that, mate.
Absolutely. Even look at the didgeridoo, and the frequencies that come off that are said to be of a healing property. Might sound out there, but you start looking into Rife and people like that, and you see that frequency definitely can be used for just that purpose. So, Jimmy, we're talking UFOs, we're talking the ancient people. I know you like looking at ancient civilizations, and like Johnny says, they're the history of the Aboriginal people over in Australia. Wow, man.
I know some of the primitive paintings that can be found in Australia are really amazing too. And I also wanted to remind people of the Dogon tribe from Africa being able to know about Sirius B, because I know, Kev, you've talked about the Dogons before.
They are, yeah. Not only that, Jimmy, they knew about A and B, and they still do rituals to this day that coincide with the orbit of that. Long before we ever seen them with telescopes, they were doing this, right? But also, when you look at their cosmology, their creation myth, stuff like that, it's Laird Scranton, and I've got his book up on the shelf there. I urge anyone to check that out, because you look at some of the hieroglyphs that's used there, Jimmy, and arguably, you can tie them in with and compare them to the same symbols and the same science that comes from the world of quantum physics. So where did they get all that from, dude?
It's literally amazing. And I think, honestly, I think there's a lot of the past human endeavors on this planet, the human beings that have gone before us. I think a lot of that information and the science has been lost. And there's a lot of talk about UFOs, and my personal feeling about UFOs is I kind of like to think that they come from the inner earth, that these are just because, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he specifically says that he goes into a ship and flies up above the flood and stays in space until the flood is over and then comes back down. So I kind of think that a lot of these saucers, and I'm not saying everyone, but I think a lot of what we see is actually coming from the center earth. I think there's still, I think these ancient peoples that know about these odd scientific methods for, utilizing magnetics and also knowing about space, I think is directly tied to these peoples from antiquity going underground.
Definitely. And, in the last segment of the show, we're going to get into a famous case from Wales. We kind of went down a rabbit hole here, so we did, Ben. But, something else that ties in with this, and I'm going to be going to see him very, very shortly, is David Icke. Now, he spent time with the Zulu leader, Credo Mutwa, and they certainly another ancient people that talk about, aliens, people coming to this planet in ancient times. All of these things are kind of there, if you want to piece them together, Ben. And here we are today, still arguing over whether there's aliens out there or not.
Yeah, the actual interview with David Icke and Credo Mutwa is absolutely fascinating, and it's extremely interesting because I started looking into the background to everything he talks about, and I came across an author called Lyle Watson, who's actually a South African researcher who was originally on a normal course, and then he started looking into ancient mysteries and things like that, and he got together with an adventurer called Adrian Boshier, an English guy. And they explored this whole world and even interviewed Credo Mutwa. Very, very interesting book called Lightning Bird. And what's remarkable about it is how the mythology of the indigenous South African people is so similar to that of other countries. They talk about, for example, shape-shifting reptilians that can disguise themselves as humans. They talk about creatures that came down in the ancient world and actually genetically modified and interbred with creatures to create modern humans. They talk about how that the extraterrestrials are still at work on the Earth, influencing the world through politics and through spirituality and through abduction, things like abduction. Credo Mutwa himself was abducted in, I believe, in the late 1950s. I think it was 1959. And he went through a very similar experience to that of Antonio Villas-Boas, who was a Brazilian, so lived thousands of miles away in Brazil in 1957. He had a very, very strange and disturbing UFO encounter, very, very famous one. He comes across an alien that looks a bit like a human woman. It's a very, very strange thing. Credo Mutwa had a similar experience when he was in Mozambique in southern Africa, and he encountered what sounds like very, very similar creatures. It's extremely odd. So, yeah, fascinating chap, and a fascinating insight, I think, into perhaps the past of this world.
Yes, I think he speaks of the Chittahuri. No less. Oh, yes, you can't beat a bit of Chittahuri. Absolutely. But, it just shows, ancient aliens, alien stories from our present day. This is the kind of stuff that we should be looking at. We shouldn't be getting all divided over these silly elections that are going on over in America today. This is the kind of topics that pull people together. And these are the kind of questions, Ben, that we should be asking and expecting answers to now in the year 2018 as to whether we're alone or not, whether there's communications going on, stuff like this. And it just gets so frustrating, it does, because like we were saying earlier, the more information that comes forward, it seems to be that the further away from true disclosure we become.
Yeah, we do seem to be, unfortunately, in a situation where there are active steps being taken to prevent us accessing this information, and indeed to put us into a mindset where we won't even be interested in looking at this information when it can't be suppressed. And that's very unfortunate. Of course, it is deliberate. Of course, it involves all kinds of things, including the trolling that we were talking about earlier. That's the very truth movement, the very group of people such as the UFO paranormal conspiracy theory community is being subverted and distracted and disrupted by well, I think some of the people behind it are just doing it for their personal reasons. But obviously, the whoever's behind the truth embargo, as Stephen Bassett calls it, are capitalizing on this. In a sense, it's very serendipitous of them. It's good luck that this happens to have broken out, and they're going to encourage it. And I see signs that that's happening. I mentioned a certain gentleman who's quite prominent in the UFO world and has been for a long time, who is jumping on the bandwagon of the trolls. And when I do wonder why he's doing it. And time's getting on, Kevin. We're living in 2018, like you said. These are mysteries that really people need to get to grips with. The evidence is there. The studies by people like David Icke have been done. But again, it's breaking that hypnotic hold that the psychological manipulators behind the truth embargo have on people. That seems to be the challenge. It's not uncovering information. It's getting the information that's been uncovered and getting people to and putting it in front of people so they will actually look at it. Because once that happens, I don't think that the cover-up can actually be maintained. When people are in the mindset where they want to discover more about this in large enough numbers, a critical mass will be hit where the truth has to come out. And things like Oumuamua might be helping that.
And you can look at, things like the commercialization of space as well. You've got Jeff Bezos and his Blue Origins, that company. You've got Virgin Media's Richard Branson, he's another one. And of course, you've got Elon Musk with SpaceX. All of these companies are soon to be leaving the face of the Earth, going into near-Earth orbit, some talk of them going to the moon. You've got Musk going out to Mars. And I think, as it becomes more commercial and there's more avenues to make money from space, I think this truth embargo, it will be loosened. It will be kind of removed. And it's going to be harder and harder to keep the lid on it, really, when you think about it, Ben, especially when people are eventually going to be, when it becomes affordable. I know it's not going to be affordable for us in the first few kind of years, but I imagine that price will come down and down and down to the point where, we are approaching being a civilization where we live on this planet and other planets in our solar system.
Of course, and the more people get involved in something, the lower the prices get. There already have been a couple of space tourists who've gone up into the International Space Station.
And about the paradigm change now with the reusable rockets. That's billion after billion of dollars that's been saved every time.
Oh, well, this is Elon Musk and people like Jeff Bezos have been building these craft which can land. Unfortunately, of course, this is nothing compared to what is also available in terms of the secret space program, copyright, trademark. But if you look at the development of anti-gravity and free energy power plants and propulsion systems, which we've talked about on this show many times, in a sense, these guys are tinkering with obsolete technology, and I want to grab them by the scruff of the neck and say, look, come on, guys, look, you realize that there's so much more than this. Now, if you really want to be impressive and you really want to get people's attention and indeed be a very, very successful business, try looking into this area instead. But they won't do it. And the reasons why some people think they're part of the cover-up, personally...
NASA came out years ago. And they said that they had been working on, the EM drive, the electromagnetic drive. And then they said, well, no, it's not that doable. And then we had a guy in the UK who absolutely successfully demonstrated that the EM drive works. And so many more of these propulsion systems that we should, and obviously behind closed doors in the hidden hangars, we are working on. And, we are living in a capitalist world. People are always going to make money. But so if you start to roll these technologies out to the public, Jimmy, there's an avenue for the people who have the truth embargo on everything. They can still make their buck off the new technologies that come forth, right?
Right. And, I used a piece from Contact, a clip from Contact on my show last weekend. And it was the piece where Jodie Foster is under intense scrutiny in Congress. And it was an interesting piece because it really kind of got me thinking because what the character James Wood was saying was, well, what would it, because she had gone through this machine that they built. All the countries of the world had built this machine because they had gotten this message from an alien source. And so James Wood put forward that what would it take to fake that signal? All you would need was a satellite. And then he put forward that this guy who was up in space, his last thing was that he was going to fake this alien signal so that the countries of the world would fund this piece of technology that he wanted to build. And it was interesting because I think, with this Project Bluebeam that everybody always talks about, I think if we got a signal from space and we got some diagrams on how to build a machine that could let us go to this other dimension without, the need for the ships. And what really struck me, you guys, about that movie was that at first she was mocking the guy about God. And she brought up Occam's razor to him, and he said, "Well, did you love your father?" And she says, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, prove it." And she couldn't say anything. And when she was in that exact conversation, trying to prove that she went to another dimension through that machine in the 1 second that she was gone, she was trying to prove it. And the guy brought up Occam's razor to her, and she couldn't prove it. But she was gone to another dimension for 1 second. And I think if we ever got a message from an alien, I thought of Elon Musk immediately when they brought up the character who was in space. I think his name was Hadron or something like that. I immediately thought of Elon Musk, and if he had a satellite, how he could fake a signal from space to make the planet come together for once and for all against the aliens or whatever.
Oh, why would Elon do that? Why did you go down that road with Elon, Jimmy? He wouldn't fake that.
Well, he's
Jimmy,
got the ability to
you're
launch.
playing with fire, Jimmy. You're slagging Elon off here. Kev will not be happy.
Oh, I wasn't slagging him. I was saying that he's smart enough to realize that the signal from space may just be the only thing that will bring humanity together, and he already knows that he can't fund the type of equipment we need to go. So maybe he could send us a signal.
There's not enough time left in this show to pick it up.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Wow, you can feel the energy in the air tonight, and that's what happens when Ben Emlyn-Jones comes on to KBS once a month. And I urge you all check out Ben's website over at hpanwo-voice.blogspot.com. You can keep up to date with everything that Ben is into. He's currently working on putting the finishing touches to his third book in the trilogy. This one's called Roswell Redeemed, Humanity After Disclosure. And that's a question, How will it look after disclosure? Because despite everything, the truth is coming. It's coming to the surface, and we're going to have to really face up to it one day really soon. But before we get back into a story closer to home for Ben, let me remind all of you brilliant people out there tonight that are generating the energy in here. I can feel it. I know you can probably feel it as well. But stay tuned right after this because, as I always say, it does not end here. And that's exactly the same thing can be said tonight because Phoenix will be on immediately after the Kev Baker Show. And then it's the man himself. Yes, Joe Joseph. He is back on the network with the Freedom Link. And I believe our very own Jimmy might well be joining Joe tonight. So that's an hour after the Kev Baker Show finishes. All to look forward to right here, where silence is consent on Truth Frequency Radio, tfrlive.com. So then, Ben, coming to you now. And last time we spoke, last month, I asked you after the show about a UFO incident that was very close to home for you. And this is, of course, something coming from Wales. And you've looked into this. I believe you're currently looking into it further. But talk to us about this very little known about UFO incident in Wales.
Yeah, this is something that is close to my heart because I come from Wales, even though I live in Oxford.
The
I am
land
Welsh.
Dragon. You're from the land of the reptilian, man.
Oh, yes, indeed, man. The big red reptilian on the flag. I am indeed. And so I found out about this. I was particularly interested in it. And Wales has had some really, really good UFO events over its time. For example, the Berwyn Mountains incident of 1974, very famous and a very, very important event called the Welsh Roswell sometimes. Now, there's been another one more recently in 2016, which I think could be equally, if not more, significant than Berwyn Mountains. And I'm not the person who actually did the actual research into this. For that, I have to credit Gary Jones and several other people at the Swansea UFO Network, who really were the brains behind all the ground research. But they've been very much helped because the principal witness, Kaz Clark, has been very cooperative with the researchers. And that's been very, very helpful indeed. In fact, Kaz has spoken at several conferences, and she's been a guest on the Panwo show as well. And I'm actually making a little video about this, and I'm actually going to do some filming in Wales next weekend with Kaz and Gary. So I'm looking forward to that very much, and hopefully the video will be done because I'm trying to do the book as well. So I'm juggling an awful lot of things, but I'm hoping to get that video done too as well because I really do think that this is a significant event. There's been a lot of talk about it being other things. There's talk about it being just a military exercise. Someone else has suggested it's something to do with the Royal Mint, which is not far away from the actual location. But I don't think so. I think there is something genuinely extraterrestrial going on here. What happened was it was in early 2016, Kaz actually saw a strange object appear. Now, this was just after, incidentally, there was large amounts of aircraft flying around, an unusual amount of air traffic over the area.
That's quite key. This was before.
It was before.
Before the incident, we've got a lot of activity in the air. I think it's, because usually you hear about the air activity afterwards, because this kind of puts a different perspective on things when it's there beforehand, Ben.
Yeah, it's almost as if someone high up in the authorities knew that something was about to happen. They didn't know the exact location, but they knew more or less where it was going to happen. There's signs that this happened. This was the case during during the Berwyn Mountains incident, and also during the Nottinghamshire case in 1987. You see a large amount of activity in the area before the event happens. So it's almost as if they know roughly within maybe a few hundred square miles that something is going to happen in a certain location. And then they get the assets they need. Like, for example, they set up a forward operating base for the army and things like that, which happened at Berwyn Mountains. What happened was Kaz noticed there were a large amount of aircraft in the area. People all over the town she lives in, Pentech, they noticed there were these planes flying over all the time. And then later on at night, she was in her back garden, I believe, and she saw this strange triangular object appear. It just appeared almost like out of a hole in the sky. And this is where you get into the idea of portals and interdimensional things. It just almost came out of this hole in the sky. I hope I'm describing this right, because this is basically what she told me. I think if I'm remembering what she said correctly, I'll be talking to her in a few days. But it had lights around it, and there was bolts of lightning coming off it. A large triangular-shaped optic, a black flying triangle. And several other objects appeared nearby, and all kinds of weird things. It was all a very, very weird thing that she saw. And if I remember rightly, there were several red objects nearby as well. So smaller objects. Excuse me.
This almost sounds like it could be something to do with us. And I'll bring you in here, Whistles, right? Because this is interesting, and the reason I got kind of Ben to emphasize the fact that these kind of craft were the military craft. They identified flying objects that people knew were in the sky. It does seem to me like they were almost awaiting for the arrival of something, Johnny. And then you hear about what Ben was describing there, almost like a portal, something like that. And then a classic black triangle. That sounds like the old TR-3Bs that a lot of people claim to have taken photographs of, claim to have seen. And again, this is fascinating. That this is more secret space program, than some of the information we're getting coming to the table right now from some of the alleged whistleblowers out there. And I think this gives us a little window maybe into the kind of craft that we ourselves have, either back engineered from aliens or, that came from the technology of the Nazis with the bells, stuff like that.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry.
John.
Yeah, sorry, Ben. We've seen how many of the triangle-shaped one, Kev, that we have seen, but the ones that get me are the ones that just sit there and make no noise. That's got to be like alien technology. That's not ours. We would never have that technology.
Well, that's really what the bell was, though, Johnny. Anti-gravity. No propulsion system that makes a noise.
But I know. But where did they get it? Do you know what I mean? It's definitely came from some other knowledge, definitely. And as you say, that one down in Wales, if they have all the military and everybody all down there waiting for that, Kev, do you know what I mean? You wonder where they get this information or who is actually watching this, guys. And do you know what I mean? Just what they must be picking up at times if they know that these things are coming in.
You say to that, Ben?
Yeah, the question is how. How do they know? And I mean, obviously, it depends on what the object is. If it is some kind of secret technology, then that could be explained. If it's actually a creation of humans, obviously, if it's extraterrestrial, there must be another explanation for how they know in advance these things are going to appear. And it's what's interesting about this particular case is it's like a close encounters of the second kind, but also possibly a crash retrieval. And the reason I say that is because the SUFON, the organization that actually looked into this, did some scouting around, and they found that something strange had happened in a forest nearby. Though what happened was that there was a lot of activity. The area was sealed off. There was big roadblocks and everything, and then they found that there's some trees had been cut down. It's almost like something had been there, and they wanted to get rid of all the evidence. For example, there was a lot of rubbish in that wood. Local people were fly tipping and things like that. Everything was removed. And this was after the local people had been phoning the council for years on end, asking them to do something about it. And now suddenly something had been done and all this rubbish had been removed. Some trees had just been cut down as if they wanted to remove signs that something had been in the woods. And now there has been some investigation from several angles into this. I'm just one of many researchers who've been looking into this. One of them is that some researchers have accepted the premise or the fact that there was some kind of military exercise because there were loud explosions. Explosions were heard, and several people put in a Freedom of Information Act request for the Ministry of Defence, and they said yes, there was some kind of exercise involving the local hospital and an army unit, etc., and several units of the Royal Air Force that were in that area doing some kind of military exercise. Now, it wasn't just the Ministry of Defence that the FOIAs were sent to. The NHS, the local NHS trust, was also contacted. Now, what's strange about this, and I can speak from experience because I've been involved in these exercises myself when I was a porter at the John Ratcliffe Hospital, which was an NHS teaching hospital, is that there would be some kind of documentation. There would be some people at the hospital would have to know about it, that they were involved in this exercise. And I mean, this is often done at our place because the military used to use my hospital an awful lot. But there's nothing. They found no documentation. It's like the hospital didn't even know this was going on. So we have two official statements or two paper trails that contradict each other. So this sounds to me like a cover-up. It sounds to me like what the actual statements that have been released from the official sources are cover-ups. Something went on there, and now they're telling us it's an exercise afterwards. This sounds like a kind of weather balloon story, if you ask me. So I'm very, very interested in this case. I'm looking forward to meeting Kaz, the witness, and Gary and other people who are actually involved in researching this and hopefully producing a really, really good video about this. I'm looking forward to that enormously.
Well, this is a very interesting story indeed, and I think back to my time in the military in Wales. Can't say I've got the best of memories of Wales, but Black triangles. I don't know why that kind of smacks of military projects, SSP kind of stuff, our secret technology. And when you throw that into the mix with whales as well, I could definitely, in my mind, it doesn't mean anything right enough to speculate, whether we got the technology from something here or whether we got the technology from aliens. I think that's our secret space program. And then last night, Whistles, we were discussing, the night vision stuff. These kind of big, huge space platforms that you can see with night vision goggles and things like that. Now, them, I don't think they're ours. Maybe they are, I don't know. But it really opens a case up for the fact that we look at aircraft and things like that, identifiable flying objects, okay? And we think we know most of it. I bet you if we were to see all of the kind of secret craft and the stuff we've never heard of, Johnny, the stuff that we do know about, again, it would only be a fraction of what's really out there, both in our own skies and probably flying between here and the moon and God knows elsewhere.
Kev, I think you're right, because I think if we seen even half of the things that they have got, we would probably have our mind blown. And that's, honestly, that's not an exaggeration.
Truth, Whistles, you can handle that truth.
No, but you could just imagine, do you know what I mean? Some of the things you're talking about, do you know what I mean? It defies belief, really. But whether we'll get to see some of it in the near future, Kev, who knows?
Of course we will. Of course we will. Be confident, Whistles. And that takes me back to you, Ben. You've got this story in Wales. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, but...
Well, it's really impossible to know exactly what this object was at the moment. I mean, it could be something extraterrestrial, or it could be something to do with the secret space program or secret aviation projects. I mean, you're right. There are very, very advanced secret aviation projects involving craft, which have very, very unusual propulsion systems and power plants indeed, not just spy planes and things like that, but the TR-3B you mentioned, which is actually... has an anti-gravity drive. It has electrogravitic propulsion systems. This is beyond anything that's publicly available in the world of aviation technology. It could be something like that.
You've got the X-37B, the one that flies about for a year at a time, and nobody really knows what it gets up to.
That's the space shuttle, yeah.
Yeah,
that's essentially a space shuttle. It's unmanned, but it's a space shuttle.
If we talk about the Janus flights that go from Las Vegas and Area 51. This is like the Janus flight out to the secret stuff that we don't get to hear about unless people like Gary McKinnon bring it to the table.
If what happened at Santrisant in 2016 was some kind of secret aviation project, then my guess is that something went wrong somewhere, because it appeared in a populated area just north of Cardiff. And obviously, because there were craft around beforehand and then there was this cover up afterwards, it could have been that something went wrong. And if it did crash and like it came down in these woods, then there was obviously they wanted to get rid of the evidence as quickly as possible. I'll find out more, I think, when I come back. Hopefully, I'll have a nice video I can actually upload. I'm going to make it as good as I possibly can and deal with the facts as best I can. And hopefully, we can maybe discuss it on the next program, Kev.
There's another story, I think, from Wales where there's allegedly something that went down. Now, this was way, way back in the day, maybe 60s, 70s time. A couple of farmers, they had seen something. You had the local police coming in, and then the military turned up. And I don't know if you know anything about that one. Ben, it went down in a valley, something like that.
Right, I don't know. I mean, it sounds familiar. I'm very familiar with the Bedouin Mountains incident. That took place in January 1974 near a place called Llandrillo, which is in the Dee Valley.
I'm glad you said that, not me.
If you're not familiar with the Welsh language, it's a bit tricky to pronounce these names. But an object came down on a mountain range called the Bedouin Mountains, and there was a loud explosion. There was a loud bang. People was put down to an earthquake. That was the official story. That it was an earthquake. The thing was, a witness, someone called Pat Evans, who was a local nurse. She thought a plane had crashed up there, and because she was the local nurse, she decided to head to the area to see if she could help, to see if there may have been people who were injured who may need help. She got to the location and she didn't see any crashed aircraft. What she saw, according to her description, was a spherical glowing object sitting on the mountainside.
This is the story. This is the same one, dude.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's the one, right? Yeah. Now, what's odd about that is that it appears that there was some foreknowledge with this as well, because there was a camp, a forward operating camp that had been set up near just down the valley, and there were army lorries and things driving around. And what's more, there were people on the mountainside near this object that appeared to have torches. So there were people wandering around with torches. Now, this means, I mean, for the army to have got there that quickly, they must have known in advance, because they could never have got there that quickly unless they had some kind of foreknowledge that something was going to happen, not the exact location, but somewhere in that area, somewhere roughly in that area, something was going to happen. This is why they had the big camp set up a few miles down the valley, which people reported seeing lorries and things driving around, and Jeeps and Land Rovers, several hours before this object came down. And so, again, if they knew this was going to happen in advance, how did they know? This big glowing ball of light which changed colours. It was very, very weird indeed. Richard D. Hall, the researcher, has actually done some calculations and worked out this thing was huge. It was like about 50 feet across, this glowing ball, bright coloured and really, really weird.
Back to what Johnny says, I'm really. I mean, that's something. I mean, that one there. That again, we can say prior knowledge, and again, a big glowing ball, an orb, a silver kind of thing. Now, this to me, again, this sounds more otherworldly. So that opens up the question then. Are we in communication with some civilization that does have advanced technology, but it's kind of, not random where the wormhole or however they get here, kind of where it comes out, but, it's a bit dodgy, this form of travel, isn't it? It's almost like you're spat out into the atmosphere and you've got a bunch of soldiers waiting to pick you up. It does. I would say we're in communication with them if we do know where they're going to be.
That could be one explanation, because if they maybe they got some message saying one of our things is going to come down and it's going to be around here, just thought we'd let you know in advance. All right, just if you want to keep it quiet from the people, you need to get some guys up there to deal with it. All right, and they'll say, well, where is it going to come down? We don't know exactly. It's sort of somewhere in northeast Wales. Just make sure you have a few people hanging around so they can move in quickly when this thing actually does hit down. It can be pinpointed. You see this in Nottingham as well, the case I talked about in Nottingham, which we've discussed before.
Well, I need to ask you something from the chat room. Somebody was very keen to get your thoughts on crop circles. And here's the rub, right? Because you could make a case. There are dots to be connected that these two topics do connect. And I say that because one hypothesis could be that the crop circles, and I'm not talking about the obvious ones that are made by Doug and Dave or the ones that corporations pay to get made, advertising their gear, stuff like that. But what if the genuine ones, and they're very mathematical in nature, the symmetry, the patterns, the geometry that's involved, what if they're communications with military and otherworldly, other dimensional beings? But what's your thoughts on the whole crop circles?
Oh, I'm very interested in the crop circles indeed. Crop circles are a really remarkable thing, which is kind of taken off, because it's taken off in a sense because, of course, there are man-made crop circles, and it is a form of landscape art. I know some people who make them, and they're very skilled, these people, and it is, and this unfortunately has projected the idea that that's all crop circles are. They are nothing more than a form of landscape art, and people who think they're just left there by aliens are just deluded. However, a lot of scientific research has been done into this, and there's people such as David Caton and several other people who've been looking into this in detail. There's a couple of people in America who've been studying this, Pat Delgado and Michael Glickman and other people. And they've concluded that not all of them can be accounted for by the activities of humans, because we know the methods that human crop circle makers use. They use a plank with a rope around it, and they use this to flatten down the actual the crop plants, the wheat plants, and make a path basically through the entire field, which is how the shapes appear. This is what Doug and Dave were doing. If you remember when Doug and Dave came clean, and there was that big,
yes, man, Doug and Dave, they're class.
Douglas Bowers, David Chorley, two pensioners from Wiltshire, who they fooled the world. Apparently, we fooled you. They remember the headlines, and it turns out they'd been making them all along. These two guys, and they did a little demonstration circle for the news, which was just a very, very simple one. It wasn't half as good as a lot of the shapes that have been appearing. And to me, that's just another. So, oh, it's a military exercise. Oh, it's a weather balloon. Oh, it's two old guys from Wiltshire. They've been fooling you. It's a cover-up.
Ben, it's swamp gas. Come on, man.
Of course, there's that as well. Yes. They'll say anything. They'll say anything other than.
One other thing that's come up in the chat room, and I hate to kill this woo. Not that I kill the woo, but the Black Knight satellite. That's something that we spoke about before, and I think we've both had the pleasure of speaking to Duncan Lunan, the guy who received and decoded that message from the Black Knight satellite. But as Duncan was keen to emphasize when I interviewed him, most people want to stop there. Really cool story. This ancient satellite in a polar orbit around the planet, sending back messages about Epsilon Bootis. That's only half the story, because the other half of the story is that Duncan done further research, didn't he, Ben? And he concluded that really the more interesting object, and he ruled out that there was a Black Knight satellite, was a comet called VG 2012. And if anything, this could have been a real-life alien probe sending a message about a nearby star system. So you kill the Black Knight woo, but still some really good woo on the other side of it.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's like the Oumuamua, isn't it? It's very similar to Oumuamua. And Duncan also has researched a strange incident that happened at a town called Woolpit, which is in England.
Well, yeah, they were really avid Celtic supporters, these green people. Weren't they?
The green people, yeah.
Yeah, the green people, they've got season books for Celtic Park, don't they, Johnny?
Yep, they do have.
Yeah, they arrived here from a Celtic dimension. And but no, that is a brilliant story. But Ben, we're almost out of time tonight. And Jimmy Jeans, he's been enjoying himself in the chat room there. And Jimmy, I know that you're not quite as steeped in the UFO woo as us boys here. So I appreciate you kind of manning the chat room tonight. And how's things been over there, brother?
Oh, it's been fantastic as usual. And man, it is full to the brim and bristling with activity.
I've seen a lot of talk about, the crop circles maybe coming from below, maybe energy weapons, stuff like that. Fascinating topic, Jimmy.
Oh, yeah, man. Really, really super fascinating. An energy weapon similar to what would be considered a high laser lathe today. In other words, you could put a block of aluminum on inside one of these lathes and put a complex picture, and then the computer would take the laser and cut that picture out of that piece of aluminum. So imagine that, but extrapolate it out into some sort of a satellite device that could be used with the exact same technology and have force control over the energy to bend the wheat but not break it. And I think that also, explains.
We're almost out of time, dude. We're almost out of time. And my kind of fluffy, nonsensical hypothesis about the crop circles before I leave you today is that just perhaps keep your mind open to the potential for unicorn flatulence to leave such little patterns in the crops. And with that said, it has been absolutely brilliant, Ben Emlyn-Jones. You'll be back next month, I take it, and we'll get back into more of the woo.
I'll be glad to, Kev. Be glad to. Can't wait, mate.
Absolutely. So, folks, I'll be back tomorrow night with Jimmy, with Johnny, hopefully, as well. We'll get into crop circles. I think we're going to talk crop circles in one of the segments tomorrow. Jimmy will be back. Goes. Until then,
and didn't touch that dial.